So today we're going to talk about a pretty recent maritime tragedy. It's this wild story that mixes the incredible force of a typhoon with a whole string of human mistakes, and on top of all that, a toxic secret hidden just below the surface. Let's try and figure out how this all went so wrong. Okay, so take a look at this. This is the scene on June 21st, 2008. That's the MV Princess of the Stars, one of the biggest passenger ferries in the Philippines, just flipped over off the coast. For hundreds of families, this was the moment the nightmare really began to sink in. And that number, 814, that's the human cost. That's how many people were dead or missing. I mean, think about that. Out of almost 900 people on board, basically everyone was lost. It's just a staggering number, and it really hints at the absolute horror of what happened in those last moments. So the big question is, right, how did this even happen? How does a huge modern ferry, one of the biggest in the whole country, end up like this? Well, the whole story starts with what was supposed to be just a regular trip, but it turned into a voyage straight into the mouth of a monster storm. All right, this timeline here, it really shows you just a series of terrible decisions. The ship leaves Manila even though there are already storm warnings out. Then, just a few hours later, the warning gets upgraded to signal number 3. We're talking winds over 100 kilometers an hour. By the next morning, they're told, hey, you should probably seek shelter. But it was just too late. Every single point on this timeline was a chance to turn back, a chance that was missed. So here's what we're looking at. You've got this massive ship, almost 24,000 tons, going up against Typhoon Frank, a Category 2 storm with winds cranking up to 125 miles per hour. It was basically a showdown between modern engineering and the raw, unbelievable power of nature. So what was it actually like for the hundreds of people on that ship when those two forces finally crashed into each other? Well, the stories from the very few survivors, they paint an absolutely terrifying picture. Just listen to this quote from a survivor, Rudel Laborde. He said the storm tossed the ferry around like a paper boat. I mean, a 24,000-ton ship, a paper boat, that just tells you everything. Inside this steel giant, people were completely at the mercy of the storm. It was just chaos. And the end came so fast. At 11:30 in the morning, they're told to put on life jackets. Just 15 minutes later, the captain orders everyone to abandon ship. And by 1 o'clock, the whole ferry has capsized. I mean, can you imagine? There was practically no time to even process what was happening, let alone escape. But the tragedy, believe it or not, didn't end when the ship went under. As rescuers were rushing to the scene, they were about to find something that would bring the entire operation to a sudden, shocking halt. So, just as the search for survivors and, the grim task of recovering victims was getting started, everything just stopped, dead in its tracks. Divers were ordered out of the water, ships were told to turn back, and the families, just waiting desperately for any news, they were left in agony. And of course, the question on everyone's lips was, why? Why on earth would you stop a rescue mission in the middle of a disaster this big? Well, the answer was hidden in the ship's cargo manifest. It turns out there was a dangerous, completely undeclared shipment on board, weighing 10,000 kilograms. And that cargo, it was a chemical called endosulfan. This stuff is a highly toxic pesticide, and it's banned in a lot of countries for a reason. And transporting it on a passenger ferry? Completely illegal. So all of a sudden, the shipwreck wasn't just a tragic sight. It was a ticking, toxic time bomb. This level of negligence, sneaking a toxic chemical onto a passenger ship, it forced investigators to take a much harder look at the company that owned the ship, Sulpicio Lines. And what they uncovered wasn't just a one-off mistake. It was a deeply, deeply disturbing pattern. Just look at this record. In 1987, you have the Doña Paz, which was the single deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. Then, just 1 year later, the Doña Marilyn capsizes. A decade after that, the Princess of the Orient, and now the Princess of the Stars. Every single one of them operated by the same company, Sulpicio Lines. This is not bad luck, folks. This is a pattern. And it's not like these problems were some big secret. A retired rear admiral pointed right at the company's substandard management and maintenance. In fact, Sulpicio Lines had actually been kicked out of a major maritime insurance group because their safety record was just that bad. So yeah, the writing was on the wall long before this ever happened. Eventually, the highest court in the Philippines had its say, and their ruling was just crushing. They said the company's actions showed an inexcusable lack of precaution. So this wasn't just some tragic accident. The court basically said it was a failure that could have and absolutely should have been prevented.
But there's one last layer to this story. Because the place where the ship sank, well, it puts this whole disaster into a much older and honestly a much more mysterious context.
See, the waters where the Princess of the Stars went down have a nickname, the Romblin Triangle. It's famous for having really treacherous currents and totally unpredictable weather. It's an area that's notorious for shipwrecks, a place that's kind of steeped in local legend. And this isn't just folklore. The data actually shows over a century of accidents right in this exact region. But even though the location is clearly dangerous, the story of the Princess of the Stars really shows you what happens when nature's power gets amplified by human failure.
So what really sank the Princess of the Stars? Was it some cursed stretch of ocean? Was it just a freak typhoon? Well, all the evidence really points to something a lot more predictable and a lot more tragic. A deadly cocktail of a powerful storm mixed with a long, documented history of corporate negligence. And in the end, this whole tragedy leaves us with a really haunting question. How many warnings have to be ignored before someone finally does something?